Hey Svitlana,
Hello, Arne.
it's nice to see you again. And there is a chessboard. So, since no move has been made, I guess we are discussing openings today.
That's right. You
Is this
guessed it
right?
right.
All right. Okay, I was
Yeah.
just kidding, and it's true. Wow, that's so cool.
We haven't had a lesson on openings in a while, and
Yes.
I was wondering which opening could be suitable for us, and I thought we can do the London system.
Nice. Let's go for it. Yeah. There is a couple of Fritz trainers that we have regarding the London system, and
Mhm.
Elisabeth Peetz has just brought out not long ago the Jobava London system, which is the move with the knight to c3. Yeah,
Mhm.
so yeah, London system very popular in the last couple of years. Is this correct? Yeah, right.
Mhm.
It became like quite popular, and loads of players are playing it against myself because I'm
Mhm.
a d5 player.
Mhm.
Okay, so
Yeah.
very
So it
curious.
can be useful for you for both sides.
Excellent.
I will show some of the different lines that you can do as black too. So if you prefer one over the other, you can pick one of those. And yeah, the London has been really popular lately. There are a lot of really great players that play it. Like there's Carlsen, Aronian, Grishuk, Theruja, Duda. Basically, everyone at high
Yeah,
level
true.
has tried it at least at some point, and I see a lot of these players playing it in Blitz and Rapid because it's one of those openings that is a system. So that means that the move order and the plans are very similar no matter what the opponent does. And
Hmm.
that's the nice thing about learning it is that once you get the basics, the rest you just add on to it, but the very core stays the same.
Very true. Yeah, I have a system against the Sicilian opening as well, which I always play, which is probably very annoying for an opponent if you have a system.
Mhm.
You really want to try to exploit it and get the victory out of this. But yeah, it's difficult because it's very, very simple, very straightforward moves.
Right. So the London system can start with bishop f4 first instead of knight f3, but I just picked this move order because we're going to get there anyways.
Yes.
So um, at first, I'm starting with the lines with d5. This is the most the purest form of the London system, the one that is going to happen probably the most often after playing it. So to start, probably I will show one of the more popular lines, which goes with e6. So black doesn't have to cover his bishop like that with e6, but he often does and then develops it with b6. So do you know what the main plans for white are in this opening? If you have played against it before, you probably have encountered them.
Well, I'm playing super awkward against this, obviously. So I have still no idea what White ever tries to achieve with this opening against me. But of course, they're looking at c7 at one point. They're also after e3 and the bishop going to d3. You can castle in both directions. Most often, it is on the king side though, and the development is like very straightforward too. And at one point, you can also attack on the king side if black normally also um, does a castling on the king side. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, there's probably a bit more. You will come to this now, I guess.
Yeah, so the pawn structure that we see
Ah,
occurring is this one. It looks like I don't know, a bit of a pyramid, and it's a long pawn chain of just the pawns on the dark squares, and they're all aiming at essentially supporting the e5 square.
mm-hmm.
So because black has played d5, now the e5 square looks really attractive to our knight. There's no d6 to kick it out to kick it off. So knight e5 is one of the main ideas in the London after we're done development of our pieces. And you correctly mentioned that we normally go for the bishop d3 development. The other knight goes to d2 so that it can support the e5 knight through f3. And we usually castle short. Sometimes we hold it off a bit to maybe think about castling long, or not even castling long, but starting some pawn advance. So we wait a bit with the castling, but the plans are to play in the center. We have a really strong pawn chain, which is pretty much unbreakable if black even tries. So black is going to try to do it with c5, and this is why I put in the c5, c3 moves. This is a very typical reaction to c5. You almost always respond to it with c3 and solidify your pawn chain. So one of the ways to play it for black is to is to play with the bishop on d6 and to challenge this bishop on f4. So usually the way to react to bishop d6 is going to be to retreat bishop g3. But I want to show one little trick. I'll try to show a little trick in almost every line that exists here. Most of them are for white. So another way you can react to bishop d6. It's not as popular, but it can be knight e5. Sometimes it just gets to a transposition of move order because you still place your bishop to g3 and play f4 later. But one of the tricks that I have seen happen, and this has happened in my games before, is that people play knight b to d7, and already this is a big mistake. Can you spot why?
Yeah, true. I guess the most straightforward move is knight takes f7.
Right,
It just wins a pawn. Anything else won't work because the threat of attacking the queen has to be dealt with immediately.
Exactly. So there's no way to take the bishop or to take the knight, because then we're going to take on d6, and this does just win a pawn and deprive black of castling rights. And well, that is definitely the best, because if the queen moves, then we just win the piece for no reason. So this is one of those tricks that can happen, especially in fast games, because usually people don't expect knight e5 right away, and to forget that the bishop on d6 is unprotected. So that can be one of the tricks, but usually the knight develops through c6. So this one is definitely more popular. Now, black can go with the bishop either to d6 or to e7, and both of them have their own ideas. The one that we just saw with d6 can be dealt with in the same way. We're going to place the knight onto e5 eventually, but first there's a bishop retreat to g3. So we just do this for the reason that if the opponent does capture, which sometimes they do, we can recapture with the h pawn and have a nice open h file. So now we're going to definitely wait with castling and see what black does, and wait for him to castle long, and maybe we can even start quite a good attack with bishop d3 and knight g5. Yeah. So I would think it's quite dangerous for black to make this capture if he's intending to castle short. And the rest is just part of the moves that we named as the system. The knight goes to e5, and I think this is one of the key setups that you can remember. From here on, this knight might go to support through f3. This we can also support it with f4, which is the way I prefer.
I like that
f4,
too.
maybe f5 later, and then the queen can join through f3, and maybe to h5 once the knight leaves, or to h3, depending on the circumstances. But it's to me, it's a very solid system, which the plans don't exactly change throughout the lines, and this is why it's quite a simple opening to learn. But of course, the positions that you get are still going to be different every time, and it's not as simple to master it as it looks.
Sure.
So the one other line I mentioned was to develop the bishop to e7, after which, as I said, nothing really changes. You just keep going for the same plan, bishop d3 and knight e5. So one of the things that is worth knowing, so let's say if the black pieces ever capture, Which capture would we prefer, the bishop or the pawn? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. But of course, I guess since the plan was already set that the knight is going to e5, I believe after taking, well, yeah, after taking with the pawn, the knight has to move, and then the queen can go to h5, for example, which is just strong.
Right, right. So in most cases in the London, we like to recapture with the pawn because this recapture gains us a tempo, which is usually an important factor in the openings. So we first gain a tempo on the knight, and the knight will have to move away. And also the pawn does a good job protecting some important squares and not letting the opponent's pieces have as much space. And one thing to be careful about is that this pawn can be a weakness. So if
Yeah.
black already had developed some queen to c7 and you have no more ways to defend it, then it is possible to maybe even lose this pawn if you're not careful enough. But of course, simple moves can defend it. Right now, it's not in any danger. And you rightly mentioned that queen h5 is a pretty nice idea. We can start creating some weaknesses on the king side, and this looks good. The queen can come in through the dark squares. So this is why we like to capture with the pawn other than with the bishop. You're not going to lose if you capture with the bishop. Of course, nothing horrible is going to happen, but it's just not consistent with some of the other plans because now your bishop can be can be easily kicked out. So things like knight d7, f6, and e5 can now be possible, and you're just giving up some of your central control there. So these were most of the d5 lines, this type of d5 lines, and there are a few more which we haven't looked at. Do you have any questions about this one so far?
No, I guess once we are having a position like this, one of the main goals for white is to attack on the king side. Like maybe push the pawns forward, I guess. So that's more or less the strategy with the London system. Yeah, my question is what happens if there's a counterplay on the queen side? Queen goes to b6, for example.
Right. So this is one of the other lines that is worth taking a look at. So normally, whenever black wants to do that, they like doing it. They like doing it immediately with c5 on an earlier time. And this is possible too, and this line is definitely worth knowing. So after c5, we play e3. So that's usually our automatic reaction to c5, even though you have seen me play c3 before, but we have to begin with e3 so that if they do end up recapturing, we can recapture with this pawn and not the c pawn. Because if we only had c3 available, then we would have to recapture with the c pawn, and that just leads to completely different pawn structures, which we don't exactly want here. So you start with the e3 pawn. So if black continues with knight c6, then nothing has changed. You just play c3,
and we're back to our system.
And we're back to the system. But these lines can be different too. But what is usually more concerning is if the queen goes to b6 immediately. So if black had this plan all along and they try to disturb our regular development plan a bit by attacking the b2 pawn. So here we are going to play a move that we don't play in the other London system setups, and now we're going to play knight c3. So you see how this differs a bit from the previous ones because it's knight going to c3 instead of the pawn. So the pawn chain is not going to be the same anymore. So the thing is, this is sort of it can be called a bit of a trick as well, because the pawn on b2 is actually a poison pawn. So can you figure out why this pawn on b2 is actually not the best thing to capture for black?
Absolutely. So, by the way, of course, there's under the article, I guess you know it already, but for those who see this the very first time, maybe you've shared it with some people or somebody and they just see it on YouTube. In the ChessBase article on the news site, you have a board where you can replay the whole game, of course, and all the moves, and even look at all the things and make your own analysis, download everything, just for you to know. So hopefully you do actively participate in this already. Just I wanted to mention this because if I'm a bit too quick with my answers already and you want to find it out yourself, always just pause the video. That's the best way to learn on your own. So yeah, I'm pretty sure it has to be the knight going to b5 because of the threat c7. Not only that, I believe the black queen can get into trouble because now there's actually there's only one move left at the moment, which is b4, as I can see correctly. Yeah. So this can also be troublesome, maybe.
The knight going to c3, of course, had the main idea of then pursuing this knight b5 plan, and now c7 is attacked, so the only way to defend against it is to play knight a6. So this is probably the harder part of this queen b2 trap, is to find the move here.
Aha, okay, so yeah, that is interesting, because I'm trying to figure out now how to deal with this. So in mind comes, of course, rook to b1, but then the queen can take on a2. But that has to be calculated a bit more, because maybe this is already a big threat. Maybe not, no, because after the knight coming back to c3, the queen goes to a5, and I think everything is safe.
Yeah, so in this case, the queen can escape, but there's also rook going to a1, and after queen b2, I think you missed. Well, maybe you're going to see it now. There is a bit of a tactic.
Maybe I'm seeing it now. Okay, so now interesting might be bishop e5.
Bishop e5 was not what I was expecting.
Oh, pity, sorry.
No, it's not bishop e5.
Because I thought, like, after taking on c5, this might... No, it's not working.
But
sorry.
it has to be something immediate now that the queen already took two of our pawns.
Okay, so what's the immediate threat here?
So yeah, usually the punishment is quick.
I don't see it at the moment. What
I'm trying to go here.
Yeah. Oh, what? Is that the case? This is working? Okay, we take on a6. I didn't think of that.
Yeah, rook to a6 works. And this gives a better position to white. So black will be clear. White will be clearly better. It can be a bit messy because of the king being a bit in the open and all of that. But at the end of the day, white is going to be up a piece for 2 pawns. There can be problems with this knight getting out, but it should be all right, coming right back to c7. Okay. So here white is clearly better and should be a good position. And most people play this in the game. So when you open this initial position in the database, most people in this position play rook b1 and rook a1. So what I found was quite a surprising line for white to there's an alternative to this rook b1 move, and apparently it is much better according to the computer, but it is definitely more complicated to understand why it is better. Okay. So was there any other move that came to mind for you? You were quite on the right track when you said the only escape square for the queen was b4.
Yeah, so c3 probably, or is it a3? I think
it is a3.
Yeah, I think a3 makes more sense because c3.
So that's rook b1. The pawn isn't hanging. So a3 is apparently a great move and gives white a winning position, but it is not winning in the same way as the previous one. Where it was quite clear that you're taking on a6 and you're taking on a8, and you have a piece for 2 pawns, and you're pretty much what you're going for. So here it is more of a it is a different type of advantage, and it is the one that's more difficult to actually feel during your game if you don't know this beforehand. And
Oh.
apparently, I will show you the position that we get to and why it is actually a really good one. So now the key move is, despite black attacking on c2, we don't really seem to care about that, is we take on c5. So
Uh-huh.
still the same problem for black is that he can't move the knight because of the knight c7
Yeah.
threats. So what he's going to do is probably take on c2, right? That's whether it's with the bishop or with the queen,
Yes.
they're going to take on c2. So I think the more concerning one is if they take with the queen and try to trade queens. And we actually agree to this trade. And then you start wondering, so why did we go to this endgame when we're down a pawn when we could have had an extra piece? But the reality is that this endgame is, according to the engine, completely winning. And can you try to guess the factor of why it's that good?
Well, maybe it is because of a discovered attack, I believe. Well, there's so many options. So I'm looking at c6
Right.
because after taking, we can probably attack two pieces at the same time.
So that's one of that's the key idea. So you found the key idea. I'm pretty sure you can make other moves before
Yes,
you
that's
get there.
another
You
one. Yeah.
can even try c6 right away. But what is said as the line is to kick the bishop first, and then depending on where the bishop moves away, so I don't know, somewhere here, you have the
Oh, okay.
c6 idea again. And it's not even about sometimes it's not even about the discovered power of this bishop, which was pretty good. It's even just about
We just
the
take
knight
back
being
with the
trapped.
rook. Yeah.
And
Easy as that. Yeah, yeah.
that's
Cannot go
why
back.
this endgame is so good, because you can even have your discovered attacks with the knight moving away and freeing up the bishop's diagonal. And yeah, simply playing c6 later, and well, you either let the
So, yeah.
promotion happen or you are going to lose the knight on a6. So this is why this one wasn't as clear cut as the the two move.
Definitely, yeah, the rook to b1 is actually almost faulty because although there was a piece more, I would have almost preferred to play with black. But
Mhm.
this variation, I mean, absolutely clear.
Yeah,
You have to study it a bit more, but
mhm.
after getting this done, yeah. So is this, but this is not played in the high level, right? But in lower level it happens every now and then, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. So of course, at higher level, I think people know that queen b2 is a bad pawn to take. And I would assume that if someone plays this line with queen b6, that they would at least know that this pawn on b2
True, of course.
isn't actually worth taking. But maybe they're not used to this knight c3 idea, or maybe they expected something else, or they played queen b6 a move earlier than they wanted
Hmm.
to, and then ended up doing this. But it's still definitely important to know, because if you don't know, then you can definitely end up down one or two pawns for sure. So
Certainly, yeah.
um, that's one thing to remember, this a3 line. And I think even knowing it exists is already half of the job. The rest
True.
you can figure out, even if you forget.
And
So
can I just quickly announce one more thing? Because I mean, there
sure.
is this is one thing which I'm learning more and more often because this pattern recognition, those moves in the openings which are being played every now and then. If you see a3 the very first time,
Mhm.
you might not get behind this idea, but this is a pattern which we remember in many other openings which are have similar structures and where the queen takes a b2 pawn. I mean, of course there might be other options, but one of them is now a3 because the pawn won't hang on a2, and we have some counterplay. So this is those patterns which are
Mhm.
new to me and which recur more and more often when I'm having Svitlana's Smart Moves episodes. That's a nice thing, which is, yeah, that's just how your chess grows, I guess.
Thank you. So the other way to have this queen b6 occur is, if they decide to hold it off for one more move and play knight c6, of
Mhm.
course we're going to react with our regular c3, and now queen b6. So now there's
Yes.
going to be no more knight c3. There's going to be no more sacrificing of the pawn on b2, and instead we can play queen b3 and defend the pawn this way.
Ah,
So
okay.
the thing is, the interesting thing is that none of the sides actually want to take on b6, on b6 or
To open the
b3,
line, of course.
to open the a file and have a really nice endgame. So the endgame might be a bit like discouraging to some people, because you thought it was going to be some kingside attack in the London system, but then you end up getting this endgame. But it is a very pleasant endgame, and sometimes these endgames are necessary to learn how to play.
Yes, and
And
decisive.
it is definitely not a bad endgame. You would just know that you're better, and that you have a lot of threats, and the rook is not going to be able to leave, and there's many ideas here that would work. So none of the sides actually want to take on b6 or b3 and open up the files. So when black plays their c4 move, we can definitely take, and this was played, and it was popular for quite a while to do this capture, but I am not exactly a fan of it, and I do think that black has a much easier time playing this position, because we just have trouble with our a2 pawn, so the rook is not going to be able to move. And once the knight moves, there will be some
Yeah.
unpleasant things to deal with, maybe even some captures, not right away, but in the future. And this is a position that I would not recommend really playing for white unless you have it like some fully analyzed and you have full confidence that it's going to be fine. But if not, then it's just safer not to go for this and just retreat with queen c2.
Okay.
So one of the interesting tricks that black has, so now here's a trick for the black side, which I'm not sure if you have seen before, but do you know how you can proceed when the queen stands on c2 in this type of positions?
Well, no, I don't know, but I'm guessing knight e4. Now we turn the system around a bit and bishop to f5, maybe?
So the thing is, we don't even have to include knight e4 yet, but you can go bishop to f5 right away in the first place. And this might have been unexpected, but this is the whole idea of this trick.
So
is
you
that
can't capture the queen. Wow.
Yeah, so you can't capture the bishop because of queen b2, and then you end up winning the rook. So important thing is not to do this while the knight is still on b8. So if you had this similar position, but your knight was still on b8, you cannot do your bishop f5 trick because you're going to get mated with queen c8. So if the knight is still there, that's really important not to miss.
Keep
and
this in mind. If you play that and go like, I learned that from Svitlana's smart moves. Checkmate. Wait a second.
And then you get mated on move 9.
That wasn't in the program. So I actually thought now we would play knight to e4 and try to capture the queen, but that is not possible.
Yeah, so the queen doesn't get trapped there, and you would rather just go for the rook right away.
You just win it, right? There's no way to pretend it.
White can probably sense that something is wrong and not take the free bishop.
Spider senses are on, and you just move
and play
back.
queen c1. So you see, compared, you might have thought it was a bit strange to go to b3 and to c2 like this, just as we were attacked, and it looks like a bit of a waste of a move, but there was actually a reason why we provoked c4. Do you think you know why we would do that?
Well, this is the thing I thought about even before you just asked me now, but of course it weakens the d5 pawn, I guess.
Right, so first, d5 is weakened, and second, we don't want any of the captures to happen on d4 and the rook coming to c8, because our queen likely will stay on c1 for the next while, and it's going to defend, and only later it can leave and do something different. So what if in this position this pawn is still on c5? We actually get ourselves into, once again, quite a trap. Let's see. So this is still possible, of course, but just, okay, here there's actually a capture on c5, but anyway, let's say you go for the same queen c1 thing. So now black can play rook c8 or even make the capture in the first place. Then we go by the rule and we capture with the e-pawn, and suddenly knight d4 might be an issue somewhere, and you're not allowed to do some of the same knight e5 things that you wanted to do beforehand. So I just find these knight d4 tricks a bit unpleasant, and your queen isn't going to be exactly able to leave this. And maybe even more significant, which I didn't mention, is knight b4. So there start to be problems on the open c file, which is why we like to play queen b3 and provoke c4. And then when the position is closed, your queen is fine on c1, even though it looks a bit passive. So I think we are done with all of the c5 lines. And so was there anything else you wanted to add about those?
No, looks pretty straightforward. I wonder what is played more often. Can I ask what the mega database is telling us of the amount of games played? Or
the amount of games played, I think the most well, it depends also whether black chooses the d5 systems or his other systems, like the King's Indian and the Nimzo. So the Nimzo lines, let me just go to the beginning. So here, black, of course, doesn't have to go d5 and can play knight f6 because your opponent can be a King's Indian defense player or an Nimzo Indian defense player, or I don't know, maybe even the Benoni, some other line than d5. And so in such cases, the most popular is to go for the King's Indian setups. But if we're talking about the d5 setups, I think the most popular ones are the ones with the bishop going to d6. So it's going to be e6. So judging by the database, it's c5, c3, knight c6, and then bishop d6.
I see, okay.
So this line is the most popular, and I would agree with this because I see this played against me more often than the other lines with. So yeah, this one is more popular for black. I also see quite often black trying to copy white with bishop f5.
Okay.
But this basically doesn't really change your plans too much. And you can even trade this bishop if it really bothers you and play it like that. Just have a good development and keep going with the same plans with knight e5. So
nice.
You can even go for something like this. There's not really much theory there to learn. There's not really any tricks. So yeah, I guess the last thing to do is to know what to do. How does the system apply to other things that black can do? So against d5, it's pretty clear. The plans are very similar, other than a few deviations with queen b6. But what to do on knight f6? Do you think we are going to keep our exact same ideas, or how would it change in the case of, let's say, g6?
Well, I guess the setup stays the same, yes. So
yeah, the setup does stay the same, but the one thing that we can't do, so we can go on with our plan, the one thing that we cannot do, unfortunately, is place our knight to e5.
Aha, okay.
Because that's the way the King's Indian goes, is it involves the moves g6 and d6, and there's no more the knight going to e5. And so instead of this, instead of going for the bishop d3, right now our bishop has really nothing to do on this diagonal. Now that everything is closed with pawns like this, they're pretty well defended. So the bishop goes to e2 because it has different purposes there. So this is the way to play against the King's Indian setup. It's still going to be, the London is still a system, and the pawn structure and the bishop to f4, knight f3 is still going to stay the same. But we're going to have slightly, as black is going to have different plans, we are going to have different plans.
Okay.
So here we play this move as h3.
Oh,
Do
just
you have
h3.
any idea why we play it?
Well, yeah, I don't know, because I would have immediately played h4. But of course, I guess but it for once it prevents any shenanigans on g4, but of course we can play g4 at one point too, probably.
That is true, but the main goal is actually different. So the main goal of h3 is that we avoid the exchange of the knight for bishop. So if we don't play this, I don't know, we play something else.
Yes, I understand.
Knight h5.
And now the trade is unavoidable.
Exactly.
But that would
and
be
he doesn't
great.
even have to. He doesn't even have to take it. It's good to take. But you know how the main idea of the King's Indian is to move the knight and play e4, e5, f5. So we're just kind of helping black with that plan and moving the knight to a good square in the process.
I see. Okay.
So h3 is often played in especially these King's Indian setups, but even in general, in the other London system types, you can play this to avoid the knight and the bishop trade. So this is why h3, at first the move might look strange, but if you know the idea behind it, it's really simple. So the reason why the London can be a good weapon against the King's Indian is that, well, black's main plan of the King's Indian is, of course, e5 and f5. But if you notice the setup of the London, it's basically targeted at defending the e5 square for as its purpose.
Yes.
So even though our own knight cannot go to e5, it's also worth it because now black's main plan of this opening, which was e5 and is e5 all along, it's not working as well. So we could try to go for it regardless. Let's say we go for this knight h5 and e5 now. So I think the kingside advance, which is what King's Indian players will usually do, it is fairly dangerous because our attack on the queen side can come first. And this king is now going to be under some checks on this diagonal, and this is well, the computer would say it's even like winning or like much better. So yeah, so that's why black cannot always go for this exact same plan. So he needs to know some alternatives of ways of developing. So maybe he can try some b6 and develop the bishop this way. And now the only move that black needs to know to equalize is knight e4 here. So it's not exactly a typical move that you would make in the King's Indian, but the reason for that is because, as you can see by the arrows, white is going to play queen c2 and e4 next move. And if that happens, then we get a great center out of the King's Indian without all of the main lines of the King's Indian that black could have gone for, because usually you might think, why would we play the London if against the King's Indian we can get c4 and e4 in anyways, which you can. There's many other lines, but there black actually has the chance to play e5 and go for, well, the rest of the lines. Here that probably will not be the case, and well, this is just a different position, but if e4 is allowed, you just know that you have a nice extra space. So I think this pretty much covers the way to play against the King's Indian, because not really much has changed in our overall setup. Yeah, the only difference, I guess, is that you can sometimes even take even more space with c4. You don't have to. You can place the pawn on c3 if you really like that pawn structure, but c4 gets more space and lets our knight go to c3 next.
I have to ask.
That's the way.
Sorry. Yes, I wanted to just ask one question in this setup. What about the rook to e8 instead of b6 and bishop to b7 to give the power even more upon the pawn?
So as you could see, that was actually one of the theory moves. I'm not sure if this is the most popular, but it's okay. It's the fourth line.
Okay.
It's one of the theory moves. So the way to continue it is still going to be the same with c4. And the thing is, the interesting trick here is if you had played the King's Indian, then you would definitely know it, is that sometimes this e5 plan right away runs into a bit of a tactic with knight to e5. And the problem is that
of course.
is this. So rook e8 doesn't exactly threaten e5 right away,
I gotcha.
because e5 doesn't work.
Good to know. Good to know. Thank you. Yes.
So that's something that you would see if you played the King's Indian
I see. I
regularly,
see.
because it happens. It's yeah, it's what you try not to do. So yeah, this is how to play against the King's Indian. If you were worried about the Nimzo Indian, usually the players who play e6 here, they're going to continue by playing d5. And we are just getting a transposition to the d5 lines. There's not really too much difference. But let's say they don't, and go for more or less Queen's Indian setups with e6 and b6. So it's kind of the opposite of the King's Indian, which was d6 and g6. So this is just on the other side. This is one of the more pleasant ones, I think, because plans stay the same.
Yeah.
And the fact that they didn't play d5 might actually not even be a great thing for them, because what we can do is, let's say they're just against playing d5, they don't want to cover their bishop, so they play d6. So now we can go for e4 setups, and this is no longer even d4 openings, at least it doesn't look like it. So it kind of transforms into something that didn't even start with d4, and it just it looks like some random system for black, where they tried to play, I don't know, almost like the hippo or something, with just d6, e6, and b6. And yeah, you can just take the center and go with it from there. So the game just goes on. There's not really a theory that would be here, but that's just a thing to remember, that if there's no d5, that might be an indication that you can take more space up with e4, and yeah, maybe even e5 later. So yeah, that was the theory part. How much time do we have left?
A couple of minutes. If you have one last tip or advice or something short, then we can, of course, fit this in.
Well, I have one of my favorite tricks, probably. It's a bit of a complicated one.
Okay.
But I have one of my favorite tricks, so I'll just get to the position quickly. So it is in the bishop d6 line. So the one that we saw, the one that is quite popular. So I'm just going through the moves. These are the regular moves. Queen e7, one of the popular lines for black as well, for its separate reasons. But the trick goes after this. So often black plays moves the knight, so that the knight on e5 has less of a stable base, and it can be kicked later with f6. Yes. So here's the trick, is that suddenly, unexpectedly, you take on d7, which is not really what you would usually do. And then the opponent wonders why, and they wonder, what do they take with, the bishop or the queen? And the difference is quite big, and it's quite surprising. So which one do you think is right, and which one do you think is the mistake?
The bishop or the queen? Yeah. Well,
so I think it just has to be a guess, because there's no way you will see the whole line right away.
I understand. So then I would take the bishop to develop more.
Okay, so this makes more sense to take with the bishop, because the bishop hasn't been developed, and this is actually a mistake, because now, well, it might be a bit complicated, but which tactical ideas do you see in the air?
Of course, we have h7 and queen h5, so it has to be that somehow.
So it has to be related to bishop h7, and that is exactly what happens. So first we take on d6. The queen takes. So the unsuspecting opponent just keeps capturing what we capture. So now the way to avoid it is just to move and lose a pawn.
Yes.
So here we still win a pawn. And we can hold on to it with b4. But of course, most people are going to take back, because they're just not suspecting of anything going wrong.
Me neither.
And this is where we have queen, we have bishop h7, queen h5, and do you see what happens now?
Yes, it's knight e4. The question is it really working?
Knight e4 is working, and the goal is that we suddenly, the knight from d2, the knight that we weren't expecting to do anything, is getting to g5, the most dangerous square it can be, and suddenly also attacking the queen in the process, and the knight cannot be taken because the queen is still standing on c5. So this is where the knight comes in, and well, the queen, if the queen moves anywhere, it doesn't matter, knight g5, and we just win because there is no way to protect against the checkmate. So why would you, so you may ask, why was queen d6 or queen d7 or bishop d7 important? Is because had the bishop been on c8 in this line, so imagine that the bishop is on c8, here the move g6 is possible and attacking the queen, but not in this line. And you would actually it's actually unbelievable how many people still play g6 here, despite the quite simple tactic that we're just going to take the queen and take the bishop.
Piece. Yeah, that's nice.
So you see, if the bishop was on c8, then there's no winning of the piece.
I understand.
But so this is like really deep, right? So it's pretty.
That's so cool. So actually, you're not
pretty
even
unsuspecting to take on d7 with the bishop in the first place.
Yes.
But what I'm surprised about is even here people still play g6, even though it's quite simple to calculate that you're going down a piece. But I think they're just confusing their theory and something like that.
And often the threat is stronger than the mate itself, as it shows here, because you just think like, how can I avoid that?
Right.
And how can you avoid it actually? Yeah.
So you can avoid it. You can keep the game going for the next bit. And this is one of the games of Gata Kamsky against Shankland.
My goodness.
So they pretty much went like the exact computer line, which is not even the it's not even about it being that hard that you need a computer to win it, but they're all fairly straightforward moves. So you get another pawn. So at least you're already satisfied that you have your 2 pawns for the piece. And then you just bring the rook in to d1, completely calm and not really even playing as if you're down a piece. Mm-hmm. And fairly, like, to me, this is not a scary position to play down a piece. Because first of all, you always, I don't know, you're like running low on time, you can always make that repetition if you so want, but you're winning, so there's no reason to. And this is the way that Kamsky ended up winning here. So he had to give up his opponent, Shankland, had to give up the piece even at some point, because I mean, if he does anything else, like everything just starts falling. The pawn in d5 is falling. It can't take because the queen is here. There's just usually so many threats. If the queen leaves, the rook is going to come like somewhere here with the bishop or to g3. So anyways, there's just so many threats and it's a completely winning position, which doesn't look like it if you don't know it. But I think it's much easier knowing it's winning and then knowing that you have to find some quick moves.
Just the right moves. Yeah, this is very, very, very good lesson actually. To know that it is winning.
I mean, for example, just even something like this. And you just have some queen e8 mate ideas, and there's just too many threats and too many pawns are going to fall. So even worst comes to worst, you're going to have some 3 or 4 pawns for the piece that you sacrificed and you didn't find the mate. So this is one of those tricks which I think is pretty nice because it makes so much sense once you see it, but it's not really something obvious at the very first glance. So of course the better capture is the queen, and here this bishop h7, same trick, is not working in the same way because of g6.
Yeah, very, so very
it's still a draw here. If you want to make a draw, you make the draw with the knight repetition.
No way.
So you can still make the draw, but my point is that you don't have to go for the bishop h7 anymore, and you can just play castles and the game goes on.
I see, okay. Oh, wow.
But if you want the draw, this is the clear way to the draw.
This is the way. Wow. Yeah. Very, very nice, Svitlana. Thank you for this very interesting lesson.
And did you make a decision from the black side? Because you played more from the black side, and you're going to play your d5 usual lines or your unusual d5 unusual lines.
I keep on playing my unusual lines because
Right.
one thing which is annoying for people who play a system is when they cannot play their system anymore.
Right.
This is
Right.
really freaking them out. And unfortunately, I like to freak them out a little, even if my position might be worse. And of course, I pay the price if they are better chess players than me. But often enough, it's like, what to do now? I don't know. I'm completely out of my book and I'm lost. And nobody else ever plays something this crazy against me. Yeah.
Right.
But
I like your approach too.
thanks. But this is luckily if you are playing or if you want to learn the London system, of course, this doesn't happen that often. And you always have the chance to actually win this game if somebody tries to break the system. But normally people are playing the system with you, and then you have maybe one or two advantages by knowing the moves a little bit better. Yeah, that was it. London system with Svitlana. Thanks for this lesson. We see each other very soon for more smart moves. Everybody have a lovely week. Bye-bye.